11th, 2022. I'll call the meeting to order and ask for the roll call, please.
Councilmember Abdelgawad.
Here.
Councilmember Barber.
Present.
Councilmember Berenson.
Present.
Councilmember Burke.
Present.
Councilmember Forster.
Present.
Councilmember Holman.
Present.
Councilmember Townsend.
Present.
Councilmember Wills, absent. Mayor Turnbow.
Present. We have a quorum. Would you all please rise and join me in Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have no presentations and awards tonight, no personal appearances, so we'll move on to staff reports. Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Gress to make a staff report for Development Services.
Thank you, sir. Mayor, members of the council, good to see you all this evening. Before you in your packet is the Department Report for Development Services, and I can point out, as you saw, it was a very busy month in June. I wanted to point out a couple of different numbers within that, the first of which being just the building permit activity for the month. We issued a total of 250 permits in total, 7 of those being single family. The bulk of that was actually the venue of the Good Ranch down at the interchange. They came in and pulled actually the remainder of those permits for that development. And so you'll see in the building activity, they are making some pretty substantial progress on that development, which is really good to see. The clubhouse, I think, should be probably one of the first buildings that are put together and done within that development. The other item I wanted to point out for the month was the number of inspections that Mr. Warner and Mr. Erickson conducted at 741. If you compare that to the total inspections for the year, that's 25% of the inspections for the whole year that they've done so far just last month. And if you look at kind of January and February, which generally is a slower portion of the year, there were more inspections last month than there were those first 2 months of the year combined. And so it's just amazing to see how much those two drive around the city and how many inspections they actually conduct each month. And so Mr. Warner and I had a lot of discussions last week just about how much is kind of going on in their department. Outside of that, code enforcement, again, this time of year with grasses kind of slowed down now that it's too hot to be growing. But other things like signs within the right of way, just general code enforcement items. June was actually a fairly busy month for that as well. On the meeting activity for Planning and Zoning Commission, June was actually a fairly slow month. We've quite a few projects going on, but a lot is kind of tied up in waiting for engineers to submit, revisions or modifications to plan back to staff for us to send forward to Planning and Zoning Commission. So we are scheduled to have our meeting on July 19th with the commission, so the council will see a couple items come forward to them in terms of new subdivision activity. Outside of that, staff has been working on the making progress on the comprehensive plan and gearing up for the community conversation that's coming up here later this month. That will conclude staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Gress. Anyone have any questions of Mr. Gress? Yes, Mr. Holman.
Thank you, sir. Great report, Mr. Gress. I was curious, as I live close by, it seems like the building on Whataburger is really progressing. I just wondered if they had a target date for COO and opening.
So as of right now, they should be starting the parking lot. I know they had some curbing done, but hopefully this week will allow them to finish out the parking lot. Their target end date, I believe, was the end of August. The last I spoke with them, but with the rain we had, I think last month, did put them a little bit behind on some of the site work. But I would expect probably end of August, beginning of September, probably a time frame for them to be wrapped up with that project.
Thank you, sir.
As a follow-on to that, does the PD have a traffic pattern plan that you guys have been working on?
We've not talked to anybody from Whataburger yet. However, several of us have talked downstairs about what it will look like for the traffic. So, but nothing officially from Whataburger quite yet.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Gress. Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Mr. Gress. Chief Zimmerman fell ill this afternoon, so we will be delaying her report to the council until 2 weeks from this evening. And so at this point in time, I would ask Ms. Harmer to make a report for our next steps with the use tax.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mayor and council members. With question P, the next mailer that will be in Raymore Homes is in front of you, just a copy from our printer. We expect delivery of this early next week. Social media information sharing starts tomorrow. This morning I was on Foxwood Springs TV to talk about the issue on their morning show. And I would like for you to share your connections with me, any groups, HOAs, business owners, individuals who might have extra questions about question P. If I would be happy to talk about it one-on-one with anybody or to these groups, so please share that information with me. Happy to go along with you to talk with them, with anyone that has questions, or just happy to meet them wherever they are. And I also have some yard signs in the lobby, so please be sure to stop by over on this side on your way out to pick some up. And that is all I have for you for now.
Anyone have any questions for Melissa? Thank you.
And as I had indicated to the council in my email to you, it does appear that we have some individuals who would like to be volunteering for an affirmative vote relative to that particular issue coming up. So have checked with Mr. Zur as far as what the council can be doing, and as usual with certain cautions, he's indicated that the signs that are out in the lobby are informational, but the council, as they say, talking across the back fence, can certainly be talking the issue up. There is no, as long as we're not spending city funds on anything, city funds can only be spent for an informational campaign. Very important coming up on August 2nd for the city. With that, the last item for you all is next week. We do have a work session scheduled on the 18th. Only a single item on the work session, which is a number of code cleanup amendments that we want to run past the council. That concludes staff reports this evening, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Feuerborn or staff? All right. Moving right along, we'll move into the consent agenda. We only have the one item on the consent agenda this evening. That's the city council minutes of June 27th, 2022. I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we approve the consent agenda items, A, city council minutes for June 27th, 2022.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Yes, sir, I'll second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded to approve the consent agenda, the minutes of June 27th. Any further discussion? We have no one online? She's not online?
No, sir.
Okay, then we can do a hand vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstain? We have 5 yeses and 2 abstentions. The motion passes. Now move on to unfinished business. Can I please have the second reading of Bill 3729 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3729 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, establishing an intergovernmental agreement with the Raymore Peculiar School District to provide school resource officer services for schools in Raymore and as requested at the East Middle School.
Thank you. I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend?
I move that we approve the second reading of Bill 3729, agreement with Raymore Peculiar School District for SRO services.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the second reading of Bill 3729. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Thank you. We'll now move on to, could I please have the second reading of Bill 3731 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3731 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, amending the FY 2022 budget and to update the schedule of fees for residential trash and recycling services.
Thank you. I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend?
I move that we approve the second reading of Bill 3731, budget amendment, schedule of fees, trash, recycling, and yard waste.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion been made and seconded to approve the second reading of Bill 3731. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. We'll now move on to new business. Could I please have the first reading of Bill 3725 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3725 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, amending the zoning map from BP Business Park District to PUD Planned Unit Development District and approving the preliminary development plan for Raymore Commerce Center South, a 262.09 acre tract of land located south of 195th Street, east of Interstate 49 in Raymore, Cass County, Missouri.
Thank you. This item requires a public hearing. I will open the public hearing at this time and ask for a staff report.
First, we need to bring it off the table, sir.
Oh, it was on the table. I
Mr. Mayor?
apologize. Yes, Mr. Townsend.
I propose a motion to lift Bill 3725 off the table for discussion.
Thank you.
I'll second the motion, sir.
Motion's been made and seconded to lift the bill, put it back on the, off the table for consideration for Bill 3725. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously. It is now back for consideration. With the first reading has been done, this requires a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing at this time and ask for a staff report.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Gress to make a staff report on this item.
Thank you, sir. The request before you all this evening, just as a refresher, the applicant Van Trust Real Estate is requesting the rezoning of approximately 262 acres from its current BP zoning district to a PUD. This request, as you may remember, appeared in front of the council originally on May 23rd. After significant discussion and public comment, the council actually voted to table the item for further review until staff could work with the applicant on some of the concerns that were brought up at that initial meeting. And as a refresher, there were kind of three overarching concerns that were brought up at that meeting. Two of which included the traffic concerns on 195th Street and how that may be able to be mitigated, in addition to berming and screening that may be able to be adjusted to mitigate the visual impact on the properties, primarily the ones that were located to the east of this proposed site, which would be a very large undeveloped property, which is actually within the county. Then further east would be the existing Whitetail subdivision. And so as part of that, staff worked with Van Trust on any potential modifications to those two items that would be amenable to address some of those concerns. And I will walk through some of those items that we discussed, and then I'll have the applicant, Mr. Harrison, address the council with a presentation to kind of walk through what some of those changes were. From the city's perspective, I kind of wanted to start with the discussions on traffic. In that was the major concerns were the impact that truck traffic may have along 195th Street. I wanted to provide a little bit of background on kind of what has been initially planned as part of the extension of Dean Avenue down to 195th Street. Included in the staff report is a map of this area of the Good Ranch, and you'll see within that is that Dean Avenue has always been contemplated to be extended to provide access down to this area of the Good Ranch, which is for a long time been known as the Corporate Meadows site of the Good Ranch. Initially, dating back to '94, the initial alignment was actually Ranch Road, which right now provides access into the Good Ranch property. That alignment was originally, Dean Avenue should have curved over to the east and then directly south into this site. That original alignment honestly would have solved a lot of the concerns that we heard at that 23rd meeting as it relates to truck traffic on 195th Street. In essence, with that alignment, it would have been simply a four-way stop. Truck traffic would have crossed over 195th Street into this site. As things have developed over the years, though, that connection has just not a reality more, given the fact that the homeowner still lives there. And so that alignment is not a reality for the city anymore. And so as part of that, we worked, and actually in 2010, I'll rewind a little bit. The plan was actually amended in 2010 to rezone two parcels of land, which are included in this area to their current BP zoning district, but it also amended the alignment of Dean Avenue going south and pushed it a little bit further to the west, closer to the interstate. And so from 2010 until now, conceptually that has been the alignment generally of what Dean Avenue would follow as it connected into 195th Street. Just a couple of years ago, as staff was evaluating this site, we actually partnered with the applicant and the landowner to do an alignment study to figure out generally what is the actual alignment of the road going to be, the elevation of kind of how far it may need to come up or down, and kind of a preliminary design, which is what you see as part of the applicant's packet this evening. The road to date has not been formally engineered. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but the alignment majorly has been. And so to go back to my original point, if access were to be provided to this area of the Good Ranch, the alignment that has been indicated in front of you all this evening is the best alignment in which to do so without extending the road further over to the east, over maybe towards the existing school, in which traffic would then have to backtrack over to the west to get to this area of the Good Ranch. And so the alignment that's been proposed, again, hugs I-49 as close as it can and keeps traffic generally as close to the interstate as it can. And then you'll see in the presentation this evening, there are 3 access points that were proposed onto 195th Street as it relates to the proposed development. The one thing I wanted to point out as it related to transportation that has changed in our conversations with the applicant is that originally Commerce Drive, which is the easternmost access point that provides access actually down to the lift station. It follows the two north-south buildings that are on the east side of the property. That road was originally proposed to be a public road, meaning that the developer would build it and then the city would accept it. In our conversations with the developer addressing concerns about addressing for the property, the developer has actually agreed to maintain the ownership of that road, and so it will remain, all of the roads within this proposed development would remain private roads, the maintenance of which would be the responsibility of the developer. In addition to that, I think we presented last time some of the intersection designs for each of those three intersection points on 195th Street. Within the MOU, you'll find language that requires those to be designed in such a way, and the exhibit you'll find here in your packet as well, to make it very uncomfortable and almost impossible for a truck to make a right-hand turn coming out of that subdivision. With the curvature of the curb radius, and then more of a sweeping radius as trucks are heading to the west. So within that, those are the major changes that were made as it relates to traffic. I'll jump next into berming and screening unless there's any questions for staff at this point on those two items.
Anyone? Go ahead.
Excellent. So the bulk of the changes that were agreed upon in our discussions with the applicant have to do with the potential mitigation of the visual impact of properties to the east. And again, that would be primarily the existing residents within the Whitetail subdivision. I wanted to point out that the plan that was submitted originally to the council already did exceed the existing screening requirements, mostly because there's a significant existing tree line that exists on that property line. It would already be considered what the UDC would contemplate as a type A screen, which is what this UDC would require. As part of that, obviously, as leaves fall off of the trees out the years, you can't always guarantee what that screening will do throughout the entire year. So within your packet, and I will save kind of the details of it for Mr. Harrison to kind of walk through, but in concept, there has been some substantial additional screening added to this in addition to the preservation of that existing tree line. In addition to the addition of a 4-foot berm on the west side of that tree line, there would also be the addition of landscaping on top of that berm, in addition to a 10-foot fence, a vinyl fence that would provide screening for things like headlights and the potential for the noise that trucks may generate in that development. I wanted to point out as part of this, again, you'll find in the MOU an amendment that was made to allow for a 10-foot fence. Right now, city code actually limits fences at 8 feet. And so that was a change to the MOU that was made to allow for that additional 2 feet, which again will be placed on top of the berm. And so it would stand to be a little bit taller than actually that 10 feet. And so as part of that, you'll find within that several diagrams that I'll let Mr. Harrison walk through himself and kind of explain to the council some of their thinking behind that. But from staff's perspective, since it was the direction of the council to work with the applicant on that, I wanted to provide the council with a little bit of background of what those discussions were. As part of that, unless there are any requests, I won't go through the bulk of the staff report again, but because there is a public hearing this evening, I will enter into the record that tonight's meeting, the required public hearing was held on the 23rd. This meeting, notice was posted again for the 2 additional meetings and the continuance, and then for this meeting this evening, it was posted to the city's website that this item would be before the council again this evening. And items of record for it include the mailed notices to adjoining property owners, the notice of publication in the Journal, Unified Development Code, the application, the growth management plan, the staff report, the applicant's preliminary development plan, and the draft of the MOU. At this point, if there are any questions, that would conclude my staff report. Happy to answer any questions, or I will pass it over next to Mr. Harrison as the applicant.
Anyone have any questions? Yes, Ms. Forrester.
Thank you. I was curious as to, I see for when they turn out, we have a no truck sign, but did we decide or talk about on the rest of, because I don't think this is necessarily a developer, for the city putting no truck route on 195th both ways? Or, I know that had gotten brought up if we could do that.
What we had actually proposed is if it becomes a problem that the trucks are, when they make the right, they're in the county.
Right.
When they're at the right, they're in the city. So if it becomes a problem, we can put up a sign that says no right turns prohibited.
Okay.
But once they're down, we can't tell the county to put a no-truck route up.
Anyone else have any questions? If not, go ahead, Dave.
Staff report, I'll invite Mr. Harrison to, up to the podium to provide a brief presentation and kind of walk you all through what some of those changes to the plan were.
Okay. Are you going to bring that up on our screens as
Yes.
well? Okay. You don't have to.
All right, so at this point, you should see the beginning of the presentation, I believe.
Okay.
You'll see that on your screen?
Yes.
Excellent, I'll pass this.
Got it. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Grant Harrison with Van Trust Real Estate, 4900 Main Street, Kansas City, Missouri, 64112. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here tonight, and appreciate you allowing us to go back and continue this a couple times to get our ducks in a row and be back before you tonight. So I will have a pretty brief presentation. I'm joined with Mason with Olson Engineering. Carl Lay's not here, sadly, tonight. He's at Boy Scout camp sweating, so he'd love to be here. This first slide is, again, just our conceptual site plan of the 5 buildings we've laid out, kind of a drone image laid into Google Earth. As David mentioned, we will be extending South Dean Avenue south into 195th Street, doing the necessary shoulder improvements, and then, as he also mentioned, we were willing to go back to an all-private internal road system, which was one of the concerns at last meeting. So the north-south road west of D and E or left will become a private drive maintained by the park. This also shows you a high-level current status of the timber or vegetation to the east, which will be the majority of our presentation and views as we go through these slides to the east of Building D and E. This is a view from the western property limits of Whitetail Run Residential. So this is about 980 feet to the east of our proposed property line. We're kind of looking through several rows of trees. Again, we don't control this property, but this is existing conditions earlier this spring or earlier this summer, with nothing to the west in terms of development. This next slide is the same view. We've tried to outline the top of Building D and E as if they were built, and you could, potentially see them through the trees in just one corner, which is to the top right of your screen. So these existing trees do a great job of hiding what could be there in the background, again, with full foliage. This, along with the other images, were in your packets. This shows as if the trees are transparent, the Building D and E overlaid. This also introduces that 10-foot fence on top of a 4-foot berm. No additional landscaping in this image, but trying to give you an idea of what could be back there on the west side or on our property. This now really focuses on that berm and that section cut or perspective. That top section is showing an 8 to 10 foot tall vinyl or wood fence. We would defer to staff or council on what material is ideal. I think we're open to either one. We would then have that tree, which a mixture of conifers and shade trees along that berm on the east side. And then this is all within our existing timber on the east side of our property line, which we will do everything we can to preserve and have a great opportunity to do so. So there should be a really good buffer along our property line. Taking a step back, in order to do this berm, we did look at several scenarios. To make this happen, we do need to reduce our building depths, probably about 30 to 40 feet, so overall square footage will be reduced, or we can eliminate the ability to do trailer storage. So really limiting some flexibility or overall size, but something we can do to make this happen, and we're willing to do that. So just our plan in that sense. Then again, just another view looking from the northeast back down to 49 and the backside of Building D and E, showing that existing timber. Again, a lot of that's on our property line, which we'll do everything we can to preserve. That really is our presentation this evening. More than happy to answer questions that arise. So,
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Anyone have any questions, Mr. Harrison? Mr. Townsend?
Not necessarily a question, but a comment. I appreciate you going back, and I was the one that probably raised the most questions regarding the screening to the east, and I appreciate the effort that was put in. I believe, as I understand it, you all met specifically with staff the very next day following the initial meeting, council meeting, but I do appreciate it. I do see it in the MOU, and I appreciate the berming and the fencing, because in future years, should development occur and whoever purchases the property to the east comes in and decides to attempt to level the trees, but hopefully there'll be a fight to keep those there because that's on their property. The berming is there and the fencing is there, so should that occur, there's some additional screening to protect whatever the development to the east in the Whitetail Run residents that's in that direction. And I did have a question, I believe it was earlier, I should have asked it during the staff. I've seen two places where we're talking about the fencing. One speaks to it's probably specific to security fencing, where it's a chain link fence. That's specific to security perimeter of the building and not necessarily the berm. The berm would be the vinyl or wood fence, whatever staff proposes.
That is correct. The security fence would be in reference to maybe the perimeter of an individual building, something that a tenant may or may not require to locate in the park, but that would be separate from the screening requirements that the 8 to 10 foot vinyl fence would be, or vinyl or wood, depending on the direction of the council, that would be separate from that direction.
Understood. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Harris.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, sir. Appreciate, oh, did you have something?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just had a question. I appreciate that you considered doing the berming and the fencing. On that, I also saw that we're allowing this to be done in phases, which makes sense because it's huge. With that, where does the fencing and the berming come into play? Is that when you're only doing D&E, or is that something that you're going to do before?
In discussions with staff, we felt it was necessary to come online with building D&E and not the other buildings. So as drafted through that MOU, we would do those berms as each building on the east comes online.
Thank you.
Anyone else? It's all right. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. As we have reopened the public hearing, I would ask that anyone wish to address the council at this time, please step forward, state your name and address for the record. And if you've already stated your position, just say it remains the same, or if you have additional comments, you can add those too, but try to keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Anyone?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Gary Stupp. I live at 918 Kodiak Street, Raymore, Missouri, in the Whitetail Run subdivision. You have to excuse me, I have to sort of read. It was noted in the Planning Commission proposed findings of Fact 7 on page 102 on your in the E agenda that traffic will likely increase near the subject property as the site develops. It says, however, with Dean Avenue being extended south and designed and built to handle this, it shouldn't generate. And that 190, I don't even know why I put that in there, never mind. Okay, in the Good Neighbor informational meeting comments on page 54, the questions were asked, where will the main access be coming from? And the answer that was given was, the traffic will flow from I-49 to North Cass Parkway, proceeding south along Dean Avenue extension, and finally east on 195th Street, where there will be 3 access points to the proposed development. It says 195th Street and the outer road will also provide an alternate access route to the site via North Cass Parkway. This seems to suggest that an alternative route along Peculiar Drive has been deemed acceptable, possibly causing additional traffic on that road, which will cause a traffic impact that should have been mitigated by the completion of the Dean Avenue extension. Another question asked was, will there be improvements to 195th Street? The answer was yes. As a caveat, it was added that in addition, Dean Avenue is planned to be completed as soon as possible, late fall 2022 or spring of 2023, for the construction to begin. This is needed to provide access to the site for construction to the subject property. The City Council of the May 23rd, 2022 first reading tabled this case to address traffic mitigation. However, the MOU states under transportation improvements on page 71 that the Dean Avenue South extension shall be constructed prior to the full build-out and occupancy of approximately 50% of the total site. These two statements seem ambiguous, with the former suggesting the completion of Dean Avenue extension prior to the start of construction, and the latter suggesting that the Dean Avenue extension may not be completed prior to the beginning of construction, but must be completed prior to full build-out and 50% occupancy of the total site based on the MOU. The initial construction on the property may be started prior to the completion of the Dean Avenue extension, resulting in increased traffic on Peculiar Drive and on 195th Street. The mitigation of the site issues we talked about in the beginning, month and a half ago, about that curve heading west on 195th Street, and it still really wasn't addressed anywhere in the MOU. So that's still an issue. And we talked about continued issue of the school busing turning north on Dean Avenue extension on 195th Street. Mr. Burks said that Apple, you got it now? Yeah. Okay, so I don't need to say anything. Okay, so that's still an issue. And there's the diagram showing the prospective route to the Dean Avenue extension from the current terminus point on the new intersection with 195th Street. It's not visualized as part of the MOU or E-agenda. It was discussed. That's great. I have a little bit better idea now. However, you looking at the topography right there, it's very steep from going from the back of the phase of the buildings in 1 all the way down to 195th Street. I understand they're going to have to do some build-ups, there's some flats, and do some cuts, do some fills. But the grade's going to become important during inclement weather, with heavy trucks trying to travel north onto Dean Avenue, and even worse, with laden trucks trying to maintain traction before the road makes a sharp 90-degree turn onto 195th Street. And despite good intentions, ice quickly forms on those roads, making passage almost impossible. So again, I appreciate your time this evening, and we missed you 2 weeks ago.
Thank you. All right, thank you, sir. Anyone else? I'll ask one more time. Anyone else care to wish to address the council at this time? If not, I'll close the public hearing at this time. And does staff have anything to add at this point, given the items brought before us with regard to the public comment?
Absolutely. So two points I'd like to address, the first of which would be the timing of the construction of Dean Avenue. It has been determined that in the interim, until that road is completed, that the outer road and the underpass at 185th Street could provide kind of a temporary or alternative access while that road is being constructed. The reasoning in our discussions with the developer about the timing of all that and how the completion of Dean Avenue might be tied to something within the park, the way the MOU is set up is it allows the developer to be, depending on how the market plays out, it allows the applicant to be constructing the road at the same time they might be constructing things within the park itself. If the council can think back to the first phase of Raymore Commerce Center, the same thing happened there, where they were extending Dean Avenue south while they were also improving the infrastructure within that site. And so with that, we would look at maybe when a certificate of occupancy might be issued for the site. That would become more important if there were no other routes that could provide access to the site in the meantime. The Dean Avenue extension is being designed as the primary access point when it's fully built. And so at that point, in the interim, while that road is under construction, as I mentioned, it's been determined that the outer road and 195th Street down could provide access if it had to. It has been stated to staff that the Dean Avenue extension is the first thing that the applicant intends to start work on, in addition to other infrastructure related to the park. And so that explains why it's phrased the way it is within the MOU. The other item referenced the absence of the actual road alignment with the application itself. And I wanted to point out that right now those are two kind of separate things, I guess, that staff has worked on. Regardless of whether it is the applicant tonight or somebody else that would be developing or proposing to develop this site, the road has to be built to it regardless. And so the alignment study, while we did partner with Van Trust and the current property owner on that, at the time it was separate from the actual zoning request itself. And so that explains why there really isn't a lot of reference to the actual alignment of the road or any of those exhibits that were created as part of that alignment study. But there are references to when that road would need to be constructed, more or less in compliance with the recommendations of the alignment study that we've already conducted. So those would be the two items I would have to add in relation to the comments this evening.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, David. Does anybody have any questions of staff before we move on? If not, I would entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we approve the first reading of Bill 3725, Raymore Commerce Center South PUD and preliminary plan.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Yes, sir, I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. The motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3725. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Thank you. Could I please have the first reading of Bill 3733 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3733 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with J.M. Fahey Construction Company for the 2022 Street Preservation Project, City Project Number 22405-201, in the amount of $1,306,175.50, and authorizing the city manager to approve change orders within established budget constraints.
Thank you. Is there a staff report?
Thank you, sir. I would ask Mr. Murdoch to make a staff report on this item.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you in the bill for our street preservation program for 2022, I just wanted to call your attention to, we had the work session on May 2nd where Mr. Krass outlined the entire street preservation program that we would be able to do this particular calendar year. That map has been attached in your packet, and it has obviously the various levels of street repair that we will have as a part of the program this year, whether it is mill and overlay, microsurfacing, all the different categories. So if you have questions about that map, we can certainly address those. As you probably noticed, we did come in a little over budget on the actual bid, but you'll see in the very next agenda item that Ms. Williams will be up here with a budget amendment for fiscal year 21 to address that. The majority of the funds are still coming from the transportation fund and the excise fund, which is where we will draw for the street preservation program this year. It was important, obviously, that the work session materials that we gave you and the direction to staff to make sure that we addressed all of those areas within the work session, that we still were able to complete those here as a part of this year's street preservation program. And then I also would call your attention to that, obviously, coming up here in the agenda, we will have just a couple of other items associated with multiple streets here this year, especially there at Heritage and Calico in the curb replacement and then with the stormwater repairs. So you'll see those here in the upcoming items. That concludes staff report on the street preservation.
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. Any questions, Mr. Murdoch or Mr. Fearborn? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
move that we approve the first reading of Bill 3733, award of contract 2022 street preservation.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yes, sir, I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3733. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Can I please have the first reading of Bill 3736 by title only?
First reading of Bill 3736 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing an amendment to the fiscal year 2022 capital budget.
Thank you. Is there a staff report?
Thank you, sir. I would ask Ms. Williams to make a staff report on this agenda item.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Ryan stole my thunder a little bit, and you knew I was coming. Before you this evening for your consideration is a budget amendment for the 2022 street preservation project. The contract for the 2022 street preservation is greater than our fiscal year 2022 budget for this project. Staff recommends amending the fiscal year 2022 capital improvement sales tax fund in the amount of $170,000 to fully fund the annual street preservation project. That concludes staff report.
Thank you. Any questions of Ms. Williams? Thank you very much.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Fearborn.
As the staff may, or as the council may have noticed in the staff report on this item, with this amendment, we are currently projecting, without the amendment, the capital improvement sales tax fund to end with a available fund balance of $1,492,000. With this amendment, it takes the fund down to $1,322,000. Obviously, we're always edgy about making amendments out of the capital funds. That's what they're there for. But this fund remains very, very healthy for use, even with this amendment coming out of it. That concludes staff report, sir.
Thank you, sir. Anybody have any questions of staff? If there are none, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item. Mr. Townsend.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the first reading of Bill 3736, budget amendment for the 2022 street preservation.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3736. Any further discussion? Yes, Mr. Holman.
I think it goes without saying, sir, but a favorite of yours, Harry Truman, once said, if a government can't take care of its roads, what can it take care of? And we have done a fine job of that, and we're continuing on that trend tonight.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Thank you. Could I please have the first reading of Bill 3734 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3734 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Terry Snelling Construction, Inc. for the 2022 curb replacement project, City Project Number 22409-201, in the amount of $588,705, and authorizing the city manager to approve change orders within established budget constraints.
Thank you. Is there a staff report?
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Murdock to make a staff report on this agenda item.
Just like with the with the street preservation program, the curb project for this year was budgeted at about $600,000. You'll notice obviously in your packet that we came in just under that with the repairs that will be going on at Heritage and Calico here along those streets with the curb project. We have previous experience with Terry Snelling Construction for these types of projects. I did want to note that we'll continue to address the individual curb issues that people bring to the city through the Public Works Department, and they will continue to be out to do those individual repairs and patching. So I just wanted to make sure that we noted that those two things are separate, obviously, here with these. That concludes staff report.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of Mr. Murdock? If there are none, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend?
move that we approve the first reading of Bill 3734, award of contract for the 2022 curb project.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3734. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Thank you. We'll now move on to the last item under new business. Could I please have the first reading of Bill 3735 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3735 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with J. Richardson Construction for the 2022 Storm Sewer Improvements Project, City Project Number 22406-202, in the amount of $246,582.50, and authorizing the city manager to approve change orders within established budget constraints.
Thank you. Is there a staff report?
Thank you, sir. I would ask Mr. Murdock to make a staff report on this agenda item.
Not wanting to be a broken record, but this would complete the projects along Heritage and Calico here as we do the curb replacements to make sure that we get the storm sewers also improved. The budget was $250,000, and it'll come out of the stormwater sales tax fund and the right-of-way repairs as a part of our CIP project. So that would conclude staff report on this item.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of staff? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend?
I move that we approve the first reading of Bill 3735, award of contract for the 2022 stormwater improvements.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I will second Councilmember Townsend's motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. The motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3735. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. That concludes new business. We'll now move on to public comments. If anyone from the public would like to address the council at this time, please step forward, state your name and address for the record. Try to keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Gary? I see you smiling back there. No? Nothing? Okay. All right, well, I'll close the public comments at this time, and we'll go to the mayor-council communication. And I don't know, who'd you go first with last week or 2 weeks ago? Kept this, went down. Okay, we'll start at the other end. Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was glad I got an opportunity to vote on tonight's agenda. Missed last time. I'm glad I didn't try to remote in. I looked at the T-Mobile coverage area, and there's not a lot of coverage by Lake Superior and the Upper Peninsula, right on the border between Wisconsin and I was actually with a T-Mobile executive. They couldn't help themselves even with their satellite phone. Anyway, But also, I wanted to say, on a different note, right now, if you are anyone trying to travel out of the country, get your passport stuff in soon, quickly, early. My son applied for one in March, and they're in Dallas, Texas today. They had an appointment in an office at 8 a.m. so he could get his passport. And we couldn't get a new license for him because the birth certificate is somewhere in the universe. It's a good time. But successfully taken care of, and sometimes when we reduce some of our government offices and we don't get service. So when you think about some of the things like Proposition P, you want service, you got to have people in those offices answering those phones. So that's, that goes from the top to the bottom. You got to have people doing those jobs. And so I thank the staff that we have that's doing that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Holman.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have but one thing tonight. It is a prepared statement that I have delivered to Mr. Furborn for his pleasure of reading tomorrow. This is an open letter to Mr. Furborn dated today's date. About 4 years ago, we set up on a project of magnanimous scale, one of enormous difficulty and expense. Perhaps the most unbelievable part of this project is that it is not in our city. Nonetheless, we led the charge. The mayor worked very hard on this. The mayor pro tem worked even harder. City staff worked on this with tireless fervor. I am, of course, talking about the now approved I-49 widening project from 155th Street to North Cass Parkway. Although not within our city boundaries, this is a geographical section of the area that affects nearly every citizen of Raymore on a daily basis, and multiple times daily for most. I thank you all for the incredible skilled work, and most of all for the determination, passion, and tenacious attitude that brought this project to fruition. Each of you are making a difference in the lives of our citizens as well as others for better and safer, and have made this better and safer with your dedication. Mr. Furborn, I would ask you of your leave, sir, of a favor to be accomplished tomorrow as you attend the management meeting and this week and the next, in every contact that you make with each and every employee of the city. Please, please, sir, relay this message for me. Like General Colin Powell once said, if you are going to achieve excellence in big things, you develop the habit in little matters. Excellence is not an exception. It is a prevailing attitude. Raymore is a better place today than it was yesterday, and it will be better tomorrow than it is today because of you and all of the people that work here. Thank you for what you have done, what you are doing, and what you continue to do. That's all, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Sonia?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, can we take that letter and just pass it down? Because I'd like to sign my name to that as well. Completely agree with every word in that letter. Thanks, Jay. As far as my comments, other than that, I just want to thank the council for being understanding of my absence at the last meeting, and to thank Mayor Pro Tem for recognizing our family's loss at that meeting. And then I want to encourage the press people who are in the room and everyone in the community to join us for our community conversation that's happening July 27th. I think that's going to be an exciting conversation. When we have done this before, it's been great to hear from people. It is set up in a way where everyone gets to contribute, share their ideas and opinions, have conversation about what you want Raymore to be, to help guide what we're doing for the city. So if you're watching, or our press people who are here, please, please take every opportunity you have to encourage people to join us for that. I think it's a great opportunity that we're offering to the citizens here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Forster?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say kudos to the Parks Department for the Independence Day celebration that they did. I saw the number on the weekly report that 3,500 people came through. It was an amazing show. They did a great job, so thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep it quick this evening. Thank you, Mr. Holman, for the comments. The mayor and I were joking about who worked harder. It's like, no. I will add to that list, specifically call out, and I sent them some thank you letters and CC'd Mayor Larkey as well, Mr. Roku and Mr. Crass. They were the two technical leads. I would call them the regimental commanders in the battlefield, making this effort, work and doing the tactical decision-making to navigate and deal with all the different nuances of MoDOT and the MARC bureaucracy that it takes to make this a reality in those 4 short years. So it goes without saying that without their effort and their level of acumen in that arena, we wouldn't be where we are today. So definitely have to give credit where credit is due. It's because of those two gentlemen, in addition to all the staff and everyone who attends all the various meetings and subcommittees related to anything related to infrastructure and transportation, or even loosely tied to it, have an opportunity to be in front of someone with some sort of influence to carry the flag for that particular project, which allowed us to get to the point where we are today. So I thank you for that, but I want to also make sure that those individuals are duly noted for their efforts in that regard. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Berenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of great comments over here, and I'll concur with all of them. Add only one thing. I have heard a lot of people, and I know I say this every year, but a lot of people comment on how fantastic that Spirit of America celebration was and how great the fireworks display was. I got a chance this year to go and hang out there before the show and try some of the vendors, and it was a great experience. My kids loved it, and everybody seemed to be having a great time. It was the ultimate, I'm going to say this wrong, it was the ultimate small town kind of feel to be there and just kind of know some people there, and everybody's kind of talking to each other, and it's just what a great thing it was. So fantastic job by everybody that was involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, I concur with everybody, and I'm so glad now I don't have to go right after Councilman Holman, because it's tough after he does one of those. I want to just tell the city manager, tell Nathan and his staff, again, that Spirit of America was, that was a memorable one for sure. The folks that were out there will remember that. But I remember when Raymore, that was the whole city of Raymore at the park. I mean, Raymore wasn't any bigger than that, and look at it now. So it was really, everybody was having a good time there. It was just a fantastic, even getting out. There was a very coordinated effort in getting everybody out of the parking, and the police were helping go through intersections. The whole thing was just well put together. I wanted to also comment on the I-49 widening. I'm not going to go as elaborate as Mr. Holman, but that is fantastic news, and there was a whole lot of hard work getting that done. The greedy side of me says, the work's not done yet, though. There's more to do, and we got this, so I always say if we can get this done, the next phase of it, getting that bridge taken care of, that's within our grasp too. So I encourage to keep up the hard work and keep pushing for that. And I know staff and the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem will keep working hard on that. And then my last comment was, it's interesting. We had to do a budget amendment for the streets, which I'm totally for. I think that makes sense. When we did curb and the stormwater, isn't it nice to live in a city where we can write checks and not put things on credit cards? And we owe that to the city staff, their planning, how they manage our infrastructure, how they keep ahead of it, and also this council for giving them the tools to do that. So I'm really encouraged when I see that happening. Keeps our city just moving forward, keeps our citizens that pay the bills, they're happy. And again, it's nice to have the money to do those type of things. And I hope that continues for years and years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. And thank you, Mr. Townsend, for filling in for me the last meeting. I appreciate that very much. Vicki and I took a short out-of-state vacation. It was nice to relax on the beach. Very nice. And thank you, Mr. Holman, for the kind comments tonight. Staff did work very hard on that and needs just about all of the recognition that relates to the success of that story. I know Mr. Townsend and I played a small part to be the squeakers as that's what we did, right? That's what we did good. Causing a lot of attention to come our way, and Staff put a pretty good plan together, and so did Mr. Roku from over there at Belton. Started under the previous mayor and continued on. It was definitely a team effort, along with some effort from the county as well, so we appreciate that. And then tonight, Mr. Grass and your team, thank you for working with Van Trust and working out a lot of the issues that some of us might not necessarily have seen up front, but you all were willing to take the time to study and work on and make sure that we got most of everything worked out. I know that there may be some disappointed members of the community, but gosh, there's probably some disappointed that we're going to widen 49, so which is a shame. But those things, progress comes, and I think will bring some great jobs to this community and recognition as well. And then, as Ms. Abdelgawad said, the community conversation is extremely important to us. It helps us continue to work on our master growth plan as we move forward. It's our game plan for the future. It helps understand what some of the priorities and concerns are of our community as we are there and hearing them firsthand. And the staff does a great job of pulling all that information together and then bringing it back to us in a wonderful plan that allows us to really move forward on a guided basis. And I think those conversations have played a wonderful role in how we've moved forward in the last decade. So I guess our first one was in 16. So we're what, 8 years into that or 6 years into it, and it really does help us move forward. And then finally, what Ms. Harmer talked about earlier this evening with her report is the use tax. The use tax, I know people don't want additional taxes, but the use tax I've found from talking to other mayors and community leaders who have done a great job of educating their communities, getting the use tax passed, have put that funding to great, and most of it has gone to additional personnel for growing services and demands in the community. And I think that's what we're looking at. We're a growing community. The load on our services and the teams here are growing on a daily basis. And I really feel like if people would take the time to educate themselves on the use tax and what it will do for their community, they can be very proud of how it's packaged, how it's going to be utilized. And I would encourage you to educate yourselves on this topic. If you have any concerns at all, you can contact any of your elected officials, myself, the communications team here at City Hall. Mr. Fearborn is happy to take your call if you have any questions at all about it. And so when you see these items come out, if any questions come out of those, the educational materials that we're putting out, please take the time, pick up the phone, call City Hall, find out about it, call your elected official. We're happy to discuss those things and why we feel they're important. We were the ones that voted unanimously to put it on the August ballot. And so we understand the importance, and I hope you will too. And that's all I have this evening. We do have a need to go into executive session.
That is correct, sir.
I would entertain a motion to do that.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we go into executive session pursuant to discuss real estate matters as authorized under revised Missouri Statute 610.021, subsection 2.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Motion's been made and seconded to move into to executive session. Could I have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Abdelgawad?
Yes.
Councilmember Barber?
Yes.
Councilmember Berenson?
Yes.
Councilmember Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Forster?
Yes.
Councilmember Holman?
Yes.
Councilmember Townsend?
Yes.
Councilmember Wills, absent.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously. We will go into executive session, and when we adjourn from that, we'll